Then let's talk about some of the other situations. When do we start with an architect and engineers? And really, I think there's kind of two paths to this. There's the ideal path that I just went through, and then there's some like, well, there's circumstances where it doesn't work out that way. So what do I do? So let's break this down. The ideal path here, right? You start talking to your architect and then your engineers after that in this way. The best option is you have a piece of property. You've either bought it or not bought it yet, but you identify it and you know that you can do the deal. You know there's no deal killers. I think that is the best time to initiate them. Now, when I say initiate, that means like you actually pay them, right? Like you can talk to them, you can go through all sorts of stuff before that, but don't start paying them until you get to this point. I think that's the best case scenario. So after all the due diligence stuff, after you know, I can for sure do the deal. I'm good on zoning. I'm good on the building department. I'm good on the utilities. I'm good on the fire marshal. I'm good on the other things. There may be a handful of other things that go into this. And some of those other things may be not deal killers, so we can push that down the line. We can start. But really, I think the best option is you get past all the deal killers. You know you can do this deal before you spend money on the architect. And here's why, is I really want to encourage you to not risk capital. I don't want you to spend $10,000 or tens of thousands on, an architect and then find out, like this didn't work out. I can't do the deal. I went out of order. So this is here as kind of guardrails. There are definitely times and circumstances where you go off this course and it just makes sense to do that. That's kind of what you have to do. So I want to talk about that next, but I think this is your ideal situation, is to go in this sequence really with the objective that, hey, let's not lose money, right? We don't want to spend money on this kind of stuff. And same thing kind of with that due diligence, right? We are potentially risking money in that stage, earnest money on a piece of property, even buying a piece of property. We want to know that we can do the deal. And so I think there's a lot of importance to the due diligence to protect you and to make sure that you can do a good deal, the right deal, and then not find out a few months later, I just have to pass on this deal. I have to walk away from this deal or whatever that kind of situation is. So as you're going through this, you can initiate the architect. You've gotten past due diligence, and I would say it's either one or two options here. It's either before you buy the land or it's after you buy the land. And that really goes back to your negotiating with your offer. What type of time frame are you giving yourself? Are you going to go through this process prior to buying the land so you don't have a takedown loan? You perhaps are getting one permanent loan, but it might be on the fast side 90 days, or it could be 9 months, right? Like depending on what you can negotiate to be able to get a longer time on this. If you get through due diligence and you know that you can do this piece of property, but you don't want to buy the property yet, you can start at that point and initiate the contract with the architect, right? Just make sure your contract's good with the seller, that they can't back out, they can't do anything. You have enough time, or you have in writing that you can have extensions and things like that so you can go through this process. But I think at this point, you can initiate the architect and then from there dial in your plans and then send to the structural engineer. And perhaps at this point, you can also initiate the civil engineer and the MEP engineer as well. Some of these things you could do on the front side before you buy. And sometimes you can do it after you buy, right? You go through due diligence and you know you can do the deal. And then you have some type of takedown loan, right? And you take possession of the property. So you know you can do it, but you don't know all the numbers yet. So there is risk that you have higher costs, but not risk that you're going to lose the deal. And at that point, now you can initiate the architect as well, and then go through that same line of reasoning. And perhaps you get to this place after you know the due diligence is done and you're good, that you initiate the civil engineer and you start working on your site plan. But you may have had to do some rough draft site plan prior to that. I literally started with, screenshot and color penciling it, right? And then taking that, learning some of the lessons, sending it to, a company like mysiteplan.com to be able to get me just a quick rough draft of what the project looks like as I'm going through due diligence. You may have to have that kind of stuff done. You may have your investor kind of already. You may not have your investor. You could go either way with that. And then same with your builder. You can have one or multiple builders that you've been working with that you kind of like, that you've gotten some loose numbers on, but you wouldn't have at this point signed an agreement because you don't really have the land yet. You haven't finished your plans yet. So you might get some loose price per square foot based on Platinum's plans and drawings and things like that, but you haven't gotten like, oh, here's my guy and we have hard numbers and I've signed with the builder yet. So I would say that's kind of the ideal process, going through it in this order right here, right? Find the property, make sure you can do it, no deal killers, then initiate the architect and the engineers after that. But sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. So this would be, what does it look like if it's not going to plan, right? And there's a few reasons why this wouldn't happen, but I would say this, you're going this path because you're initiating an architect or the engineers, but you're bringing on risk because you still are in due diligence. You think that you can do the deal, right? Like the city's kind of told you, yeah, here's the hoops and it looks like you're going to be good, but you haven't gotten past something yet, right? Like you haven't gotten past the zoning yet or the building or the fire marshal. You're kind of having to figure these things out. And so it's kind of chicken or the egg, right? Like you want to do this deal, you really like this property, but you have to spend money up front in order to find out if you can even do the deal. And so there is risk to that side. And I like avoiding all risk or limiting it as much as possible. So I don't want to get in there and start spending tens of thousands of dollars on architects and civil engineers just to find out, that the city blocks me or something like that. So just consider there is risk if you go outside of this sequence, and that risk is the cost of the land that you potentially have a deposit on, and then the money that you're spending towards an architect. So I've seen it in these kind of circumstances where you have a piece of property and you're starting with Platinum's plans for the architectural stuff, but it just doesn't fit on the property. The property is too skinny or is a funny shape and you can't get it there. So now you start like modifying the building and squishing it and moving bedrooms. And so you're spending money to have that done so that you can see if you like this property. You can see if it fits. And again, like what if it doesn't fit? What if you don't like the building, right? What if it does fit, he squeezes it, but it just doesn't look good. It just doesn't flow well. And you're like, I know I can get it done, but can I sell these rooms? This building looks awkward. It doesn't flow very well anymore. So there is risk there. And then another option I've seen is does the civil stuff work, right? You got to spend money to, perhaps engage a civil engineer for some type of limiting factor, whether it's maybe impervious coverage, can I get all of my roads on there? Or maybe my detention ponds, can I get enough drainage situation? They have to run all these calcs and numbers and things like that. And perhaps, my building or my land is just a little bit tight and I'm not sure if I can squeeze 2 or 3 on there, and I have to run all these numbers and I have to pay someone, a civil, to do all that kind of stuff. But what happens after I pay them and they do it and I find out, oh no, it doesn't work, right? Or I'm trying to get 2 buildings on here and they do it and I find out, oh, I can only fit 1 building. Do I walk away from the deal, right? There's risk in these kind of ways. So the other thing that I've seen is sometimes cities may want for zoning. Hey, they want a certain level of plans. They may want your architectural plans done. They may want your civil plans done or your site plan done, right? And sometimes there's cost to get that stuff done just to be able to submit to the city and find out, can I do the deal or not? But what happens if you spend this money and you find out you can't do the deal? Right? That's kind of frustrating. It's like, oh, well, I can't do the deal. It just cost me this money. Should I have just passed on this on the front side and just said, no, it's not worth the risk? At some point, that's a personal decision, right? Like, what is the likelihood that you can get the deal done? And what is the cost that you're risking by initiating either the architect or the civil engineer or some of those things? So I think a lot of these things are a personal choice for you, but I do want to lay them out as kind of here's the 2 paths, and just acknowledge that one side has not much risk and one side does have risk of perhaps you spend this money and it's gone, especially if it's like for this piece of land for a civil and you find out you can't do that deal. Well, it's not like you can reuse that civil work for a different piece of property. The architectural work, yeah, you can probably reuse it, but there's pros and cons to this. So I wanted to kind of lay that out there for y'all.